broad economic backdrop and then go into some specific sectors within the commercial real estate field. The office sector, it looks like many of the top CEOs want to say, come back to office, but a lot of resistance among the staff to say, no, I don't want to return back to office 5 days a week. So, what kind of compromise, or at the end, what's going to happen there. On the apartment sector, certainly with housing affordability challenges to buy a home, the apartment demand appears to be continuing to move very solid, positive, leasing activity very positive, but nonetheless, there was overproduction of apartment buildings, and consequently, the vacancy rates rising and the rents softening on the apartment sector. So let me go into the slide and see what we find. So this is the mortgage rate, but broad, say, even on the commercial real estate borrowing, just to give you a little historical background of it. So in the 1970s, in fact, I think it was 1973, OPEC essentially said, okay, we're gonna do oil embargo, no more oil to America, no more oil to Western Europe, Asian countries, and consequently, oil prices quadruple. Current oil price shock, it's not even doubling in the prices, but back in the 1970s, it was quadrupling of the prices, causing something called stagflation. Politicians or political consultants came up with something called a misery index to measure both unemployment rate and the inflation simultaneously. So 1970s was really bad time period. So when Ronald Reagan came into office, he met with Paul Volcker. He's the Fed chair at that time, and Paul Volcker was appointed by Jimmy Carter. So they discussed and said, look, we cannot have stagflation. This is bad for the economy. So how do we get back to normal economy? And they said, we have to break the back of the inflation. We have to kill off the inflation. Killing off the inflation will require short-term economic pain. So they drastically raised interest rate, or I should say Paul Volcker and the Federal Reserve drastically raised interest rate, and consequently the average mortgage rate going up to 18% condition. During that time period, the Federal Reserve received a lot of house key in the mailbox. So they opened the mail, let's see what's in it. They opened the envelope and there was a house key, essentially sent by the realtors to say, look, I cannot sell my house, you might as well keep it. More of a symbolism of the high interest rate environment condition. But look what happened. It was a short-term, harsh medicine, but inflation did get back to normal. So inflation disappeared, and once the inflation disappeared, the interest rate environment began to improve. Mortgage rate, 18% to 10%, 8%, 7%, 6%, continuous decline almost for, a 20, 30-year time frame. The very last decline that you see, that's a special COVID-related decline, a more unique case, so don't expect, for super low interest rate environment or in the commercial real estate world, a super low cap rate condition. That's not gonna happen anymore. But you see that right now the interest rate has risen, but with the second oil price shock, if you want to call it the second oil price shock, Persian Gulf essentially tightened, oil flow cannot happen. So what does this mean related to the economic outlook? So this is the oil price shock from the end of February, where the Persian Gulf has been essentially shut out. But the current interest rate environment is certainly not better compared to what it was back in February, but nothing super alarming like in the 1970s. You go to a gas station, you are unhappy, but it's not like the case of 1970s where there was, again, quadrupling in the gasoline prices, and many of the younger people here will never have experienced it. But the older generation, remember, you went to the gas station, you had to stay in long lines, and then even as you were standing in a long line, one of the gas attendants will come to you and say, sorry, you have to go home. Your license tag is ending with an odd number. Today's an even number day. So to shorten some of the lines, it's only even number license tag can come during particular day condition. Those were the days when people did not have vanity license tag. Everyone had a number apart. But we have now record high oil production, and consequently, America is energy independent. Furthermore, we actually produce more oil than what we can use, so we actually export oil. Now, from oil companies' perspective, they're a private company. They can sell it to whoever offers them high prices. So even though we are oil independent, when you go to gas station, gas prices are high because oil companies sold some of their oil to Singapore, Japan, and others who are willing to pay very, very high prices. So the oil companies do have the right, unless somehow, say, the White House said, no, you cannot export oil, then internally, oil prices could go down here within the US. But massive oil production has really limited some of the oil-related potential damage. This is various interest rate. The red line is what the Federal Reserve directly control, the short-term Fed funds rate. And then I put 1 year US government bond yield, 5-year, 10-year, 30-year, because in commercial real estate, some loans are of 7-year duration, other loans are of 3-year duration, and depending upon which commercial real estate loan you are getting, they will sort of tie up or match up with what the government bond yield is and add just a couple of points from that. But the overall movement, it looks like in a wave condition, and this is a shortened time frame of the past 10 years. In the middle would be the years of COVID. Fed went all in, zero interest rate policy on the red. And consequently, you see other interest rate at also super low levels, which was the reason why you wanted to buy an apartment building. Very, very expensive. Cap rates were super low. Whatever commercial real estate property, it was very expensive. In hindsight, all the sellers should have sold it at that time because now interest rates are much higher and consequently one cannot extract much higher prices on the commercial real estate. So a higher interest rate environment, higher cap rate, which essentially means lower property prices on the commercial real estate. In the meantime, stock market, at least as of yesterday, all-time high. The peace deal that came about, people got excited, all-time high. Today, I think a little giving away a condition, but this Standard & Poor's 500 index, 500 of largest US companies. This increase is not from those 500 companies. In fact, it is a small subset of 500 companies that's driving this up. Essentially 10 companies. You have the usual tech titans, the Google, Meta or Facebook, the Amazon, and the computer chip maker, NVIDIA, the artificial intelligence computer chip maker. They're the ones who are driving up the stock market. And now I guess you can include SpaceX part. So this is what is being driven up, but 490 other companies, they may be doing okay, they may not be doing okay, but nothing spectacular. It's only 10 companies that's really driving up this condition related to artificial intelligence investment. Now, in the economy, we are not in a recession. And I see a realtor from Missouri here in the front row, and he's a very good friend with one of the economists who currently work in the White House. So in the morning session on the residential, he was able to invite, so we had a White House economist actually listening in the morning session of it. So hopefully from that, they understand the importance of real estate and getting the economy going part. But right now, economy is not in a recession, but if the real estate can kick into higher gear, then certainly it will be at the faster economic growth. Most recently available economic growth was about 1.5%. Historical norm will be 3% GDP growth. In the middle is the fluctuation caused by COVID lockdown coming out of the lockdown. But 3% GDP growth would be considered very robust. Anything above 3% will be considered, quite a spectacular condition. Right now we're at only 1.4% growth, but not a recession. Now, one of the reasons as to why we are still getting some growth is because AI-related investment spending boom. Again, 10 companies who are spending massively, especially related to data center, computer chips condition. And AI will be with us in the future, no matter how much you have opinion about it. Some people are saying, no, maybe it will destroy the society or not. Maybe we should limit how the artificial intelligence is. You cannot stop technology. Technology will advance. If artificial intelligence technology will advance, data center is needed. I know some communities are saying, no, we don't want data centers. Governor of Illinois 2 years ago said, yeah, we want to have more data center, we want to have job creation, but due to recent political pressure, he said no more data center in Illinois. We're going to cancel some of the contract. So there is some pressure on whether to have data center, and we will be coming out with some fresh report on it. So far, preliminary result is implying that it does not really damage local real estate, say home values in the nearby area. But who knows, maybe the perception, when people say data center is bad and people do not want to buy houses in those regions, well, the perception can translate into reality. So we are monitoring both the perception aspect, how the consumers feel about data center, along with sort of empirical evidence as to whether or not data center does have some impact. But artificial intelligence, you cannot stop it. Therefore, data center will continue to grow even with massive need for water, electricity, and others. One of the things that my staff will be researching also is from commercial real estate perspective, where could data center be located? Because there's no more need of it, and maybe in areas where there's plentiful water, electricity costs are not that expensive, and maybe the employment condition is somewhat soft, so they would like to have some data center coming into their community. So we are trying to identify, so maybe some of the commercial real estate practitioners, as they talk to the corporate environment, can say, well, maybe in this location, they're much more friendly. In the other location, at least politically, they're very vocal opposition to it. So it will be interesting on how this data center, the AI technology, but you see the spending growth that has happened here. National defense spending has also increased. This is part of Trump administration. I don't know if they will change the label in the Department of Commerce to national war spending. Now it's a Department of War. I did get a little message from the Department of War, where they actually ask about some military housing conditions. So we provided some data and they sent a letter. So thank you very much. They help us part. But when I saw Department of War, it's a little unusual compared to what we have been accustomed to. But national defense spending is also on the up. So it's helping support the economy. You are producing more missiles. It requires labor. So that's also helping in that front. But the housing sector has not contributed to economic growth. And this is where we are trying to make the argument with the White House. We're making argument with Congress to say that if the housing market turns upward, that will certainly add more jobs to the economy, more stimulation to the economy for people who are involved in some of the NAR policy measures, about the capital gains exemption. If the elderly homeowner has huge capital gains, unwilling to sell because they don't want to be hit with the capital gains tax, how much revenue does the federal government collect from that non-sale locked in? Zero. But if the person was to sell the home with a higher lifting of the capital gains tax, maybe the government does not collect capital gains tax revenue, but they collect revenue from economic activity, moving truck, lawn care, mortgage origination. So, to see whether or not residential housing component can begin to revive. What about the commercial real estate? So commercial real estate, which does not include data centers, the data center is on that previous graph that you saw, is also on a decline. And part of this decline that you see is because the apartment sector is over-flooded with fresh apartment buildings that was initiated back in 2022 or 2021, when the interest rates were very low. And once you start putting construction cranes to start the project, you cannot stop. No matter what the changes in economic circumstance, you cannot stop. So even though there is an oversupply of apartment buildings, they are still producing more apartment buildings still coming onto the market. And this decline is reflecting any new construction activity like apartment building that's beginning to be tapered off. So at least in the short term, temporary, well, we have an oversupply in the apartment, but maybe in the long term, as some of the multifamily housing starts are beginning to decline, maybe there will be some balancing in the market in the apartment sector condition. Non-residential would also include office, medical, centers and other part. Now, consumer sentiment. We are not in a recession, but consumer sentiment is historically low condition, very, very low. We're not in a recession. And I just want to highlight the difference between last time we had similarly low consumer sentiment, which was back in 2008, 2020, 12 period. Subprime loan, those fake mortgages, fake income documentation blew up. We had the foreclosure crisis. 8 million job losses, unemployment rate shooting higher, close to 10%. Today, we don't have 10% unemployment rate. We have very low unemployment rate. We don't have 8 million job losses, and certainly we don't have foreclosure crisis, yet consumers are expressing as if things are really bad. How could this be? One can only speculate, and one of my opinion is just that now we are getting news from the social media, and in the social media, you give thumbs up to one newspaper article, and the technology company, data centers, put the algorithm in. So they're gonna put the algorithm in, and before you know it, you are only getting the news which reinforce you already with the opinion that you already have. So you're only getting this segregated news, and consequently, Americans are divided strongly such that they view the other political party as the enemy of the country, the other political party as trying to destroy the country. So this is the mindset. So I think this low consumer sentiment is partly reflecting not economic condition, but sort of the feeling that the other half of the country is trying to destroy the country. Maybe this is the sort of the expression they are trying to relay here. We also know about the presidential approval rating. You know, he's certainly below 50%. I think maybe 35%. Maybe some people are saying historically low. But it's interesting to observe that President Trump is currently in G7 meeting out in France. French President Macron, his approval rating is something like 17%. British Prime Minister's approval rating is like 15%. Germany leader at 15%. So by that standard, President Trump is way up there, 33% condition. Very interesting. Now, we are not in a recession, but we're not in a robust growth condition. But the unemployment rate today is at 4.3% in a free market society. 4.3% unemployment rate will be considered to be a tight labor market condition. Essentially, anyone who wants a job, the job is available. Maybe trying to find the right job takes a little time, but if you still need a job just to provide a little support, job is there. Walk around any main street, certainly there is help wanted sign, but you say, no, I don't want to work as in the McDonald's or something like that. But you go to LinkedIn business, social media website, there's a lot of job opening in that as well. So even though the economy may not be robust, unemployment rate still remains quite low. That little peak that you see, that's the COVID lockdown. So anytime you have unemployment rate at near 4%, it will be considered tight labor market condition. And in terms of how many Americans are receiving steady paycheck, essentially W statement paycheck. Realtors are on commission, your income fluctuates a lot, but what about nurses, teachers who are receiving steady paycheck? We have record high number of people receiving paycheck today. The beginning of the graph is 2020, early months before the arrival of the ugly COVID virus. Then we had a lockdown. I'm still trying to remember what I did during the lockdown period where we were stuck at home. And then once the economy reopened, there's more job. Now we are at a record high job condition. But this is not a full story. Way the economists look at the number, especially every month when you look at some of the financial news, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, CNBC, they never talk about the total employment. What they talk about is how many new job addition we are doing. And the number of new job addition essentially has been circling near zero. Now it's very encouraging. In the past 3 months, it's been positive. But before the recent 3 months, it was up and down. Some months negative, other months positive, circling near zero condition. and definitely not what you see like in 2021 or earlier part of this graph condition. So job addition currently is more on the softer side. It's not a recession. We are still adding jobs to the economy on net. Some people lose jobs, some people find jobs. On net, more people are finding jobs. So we are adding jobs to the economy. But the number is soft because of two unique factors in current economic cycle that has never happened before. And the current economic cycle is, in Washington, people always said it's a recession-proof economy. Well, people are finding out that no, it's not a recession-proof economy. New president can come in. He can believe that some of the federal government employees that don't do nothing but just collect paycheck, or somehow the belief that many of the government spending is wasteful or fraudulent, and therefore we really need to slash it away. So why is the number soft? Because we have intentional negative. Negative is there are far fewer federal government employees on the staff. Consequently, we cannot add the job in a very positive condition. The second one is this. I know there can raise some of the emotions part, but these are just actual factual data, estimate by the Dallas Federal Reserve, how many net unauthorized immigration into the US. Unauthorized means without any documentation or simply people crossing the southern border without any papers, jumping across the border. Huge increase happened during President Biden. Then when President Trump came in, the figure has turned negative to imply that the border crossing is essentially shut down. People are not crossing the border anymore. And furthermore, there is some degree of deportation. Maybe some are self-deportation to say, no, I don't think America is for me, so they go back to their country of origin. But the other part, I think, which is much more, you see it on the news, is the operation of ICE. Some people are saying we support the ICE. Other sort of sanctuary cities saying, look, we have many foreigners living in here. They have worked in the community for 10 years. They never committed a crime. Why are you knocking on the door at midnight to see what's happening? So there's a lot of disagreement regarding this, but the actual number is that it's net negative in terms of the unauthorized immigration. So let me just go back to two prior graphs. Job number is soft. Why? Well, one of the reasons is purposeful. Federal government is slashing away. And second factor is we don't have immigrants coming out and receiving paychecks. So that is partly the contributor. Now, among the people who are finding job or who have job, receiving steady salary, the blue line shows the wage change 1 year after the other. So currently, the most recently available data is showing 3.4% pay rise. So if you think about teachers, you think about nurses, their paycheck is rising by 3.4%. But the inflation, which is shown in the red, had been at calmer, lower figure until only recently, or I should say, since the Persian Gulf conflict that occurred. Oil price shock occurred, gasoline prices are rising, all the delivery using 18-wheelers, food delivery is becoming more expensive, and consequently, you see that the red line is above the blue. Americans' standard of living is beginning to decline. And I think this is one of the motivating factors now, I guess I should say this is my opinion of it, as to why President Trump may be so eager to sign a peace deal, because he does not want to see that red line above the blue, especially as we are approaching the midterm election condition. Because historically, at the end of the day, when people vote, they're voting on their pocketbook. Are their standard of living improving or not? Well, if they see constantly high gasoline prices, that's not a good reminder about what's happening, the leaders of the country. So I think one of the reasoning as to why the peace deal is trying to be reached is just simply because the red line is beginning to go above the blue line. Now, as I mentioned, the net unauthorized immigration is negative. And when people cross the border, why are they crossing the border? Some people, maybe it's truly a refugee status. They cannot go back to their home country because if they were to return, they're going to be killed or something really bad will happen. But many could be just for economic reasoning. They just want a better life. They just wanted to make some paycheck. If somebody is crossing the border just to say, okay, I crossed the border, where's my food stamp, where's my housing? Well, country is not sustainable. Your country will quickly decline from that, so that can never happen. But the question is, people cross the southern border, so they're looking for some paycheck, where are they going to? And since they don't have documentation, often they go into construction, and they go into either restaurants, dishwasher, or working at a hotel cleaning staff condition. But given now that the border crossing is essentially shut down, what's happening? Well, it looks like there's a worker shortage in the construction industry, worker shortage in the leisure and hospitality industry, and therefore you see the wage growth beginning to accelerate in here. So now your perspective is the following. You can either view it as to say, well, if the wages are rising in construction and leisure and hospitality, this is a great time for Americans to go into the industry. We have many high school students on vacation. Unlike during your days, today's high school students somehow don't get summer job anymore. Maybe there's an opportunity to get a summer job because wages are rising, condition relieve some of the worker shortage condition. And also construction workers, do everybody need to go to 4-year college degree, have a large student debt? Or in the state of Tennessee, community college are free. You don't pay anything for community college. You learn welding, you learn all these other tech skills and maybe some construction skill. You go in and then say, okay, now I can receive this higher salary. Foreigners will not undercut my wages anymore. So depending on how you view it, some people may be concerned, I have to pay higher wages, everything will become more expensive. Other people are saying it's a better opportunity for Americans to receive higher pay. But you see the actual factual data as to what's happening from the fact that the southern border crossings are not happening. On the job market, past 12 months is showing really divergent patterns among the state. You are focusing on your state. People in the back, you cannot read the number, but you can see the color. So if it happens to be sort of bluish, your state is positive. You are adding jobs. But if it's peach, a little red, you are losing job. So here, essentially, about half of the country is losing job, half of the country is creating job. Because the federal government staffing has really declined, DC is massively losing job. And Virginia has lost job, and Maryland has lost job because many of the federal government employees who live in these two states, Maryland suburbs, Virginia suburbs condition. But you see a little variation. But I like to look at long-term job situation rather than simple 1 year for how the business dynamics really occurring. 1 year could be just a fluke situation. So if you look at the long year changes, you are finding the following. Green colors are the superstar over the past 6 years, from pre-COVID, right before COVID, to the latest. How many job addition? Texas, 11.5% more people receiving paycheck compared to pre-COVID condition. Andy, the vice chair, is from Illinois. Let's see Illinois. 1.2%, very, very light. So very sluggish job addition condition. And Tim is from Virginia, or the Hampton Roads, Norfolk region. Virginia is showing 4.1%. So even with a recent decline, the prior job gain is showing that Virginia is still a respectable 4.1% condition. But you see a little variation that happened across the country. Now let me go into the commercial real estate part. One concern has been that there's so much refinancing that is required on the commercial real estate. If you want to buy apartment buildings, if you want to buy retail space, you don't get a 30-year mortgage. Your borrowing, depending on how you are communicating with the lender, could be a 5-year duration, 7-year duration. Maybe there's a little adjustment after each year condition. So because of that, the refinancing comes in waves in commercial real estate. So in 2026, it's anticipated about more than $1 trillion in borrowing that has to be refinanced. And it has to be refinanced at current interest rate. On the residential 30-year fix is 6.5, but let's assume that commercial real estate is something similar. It doesn't have a government backing, but say the high credit or large down payment, because to get borrowing in the commercial real estate, you are putting 30% down payment and such. But you are refinancing at 6.5% on a loan which you took out 5 years ago when the interest rates were 3%. So you borrowed at 3, now you are trying to refinance, but you are refinancing in a worse condition, at much higher interest rate condition. And some people simply cannot do that. But what is surprising to me is how many non-performing loan, meaning the loan default is reaching the market. It is more now than before, but it's not a flood of loans that is coming onto the market that is in a default state. So somehow the lender and the people who borrow money for commercial real estate, they're working it out. Maybe today's market rate is 6.5%, but the lender said, look, I don't want to foreclose on your property. What am I going to do with a foreclosed property? I'm going to lose money. So why don't I just refinance you at 5.5%? So I'm going to lose some money, but at least you are at least in a position to continue to pay the interest on it. So I think some of this arrangement is happening condition, but there's even more refinancing requirement next year before tapering off. So very interesting monitor. If there is a one sector where there is an increased default, it's on the office loans. So people borrow money to buy office building, the collateral value has disappeared, and they cannot refinance, or they cannot even collect rent, because where are the tenants? Tenants are working from home. So office sector will be one sector where we are beginning to see some trouble sign on the default on the commercial loans. Commercial properties, so it had increased when the interest rates were low back in 2022, but you can see property prices have come down a bit, but at least it's beginning to stabilize, no longer depleting condition. Sometimes it could be local politics. San Francisco, I think I read one story, some kind of large, fancy office building pre-COVID. They had purchased for $150 million. And then with combination of COVID, and then some of the local policies where you have all this vagrancies happening in San Francisco street, nobody's coming into downtown anymore. They had to sell it. So what they had purchased for $150, I think they sold it for like $20 million. But that same building today, person who purchased for $20 million can now sell it for $80 million or something like this quickly, quick turnover, because they have a new mayor. And the new mayor is saying, okay, we're gonna reduce some of the vagrancy that's happening in the streets of San Francisco, like this. So sort of cleaning up the street has raised the value of the office building, because now people feel a little more comfortable returning back to office. So very, very short span of time, local policy can impact some of the driver on the commercial property. But nationwide, here's the graph that you see. So let's go into the top sector, office. So this is in the past 12 months. So even as the economy is not in a recession, we are adding jobs. As you can see, total net desire for having office is still negative over the past 12 months. Now, if one looks at past 3 months, it's actually positive. But if you look at the past 12 months, it's still showing negative conditions. So again, office market, very, very difficult. And let me just stop here briefly to pose a question to Andy, because I asked Andy while we were talking before this meeting what his specialty area was. But I think this is one way to sort of solve some of this negative trend in office. So can you just mention?
Sure, I think the return to office mandates that are happening recently may play a role in this, as more people are required to come back to the offices, especially in urban locations. That should drive this, positively. And I had a question for you, Dr. Yoon, actually around this too, so I'm going to throw it right back at you. But do you think there's a noticeable improvement in retail and multifamily markets that directly correlates to that return to office mandate, as large enterprises have enacted, their employees to come back? So more people are going to the urban centers, they're working, they're getting coffee, they might get an apartment, etc. Is there a correlation that's noticeable?
There should be general correlation to it. DC, there's still a large office vacancy, but the Pre-COVID, your favorite sandwich shop is no longer there because people did not return to office, and once they went under, COVID victim, they never came back. Business COVID victim condition. Certainly, there's large correlation, but some kind of flexible office offering, I think there may be more of an opportunity going into the future, given such a negativity in the overall net absorption. Now, vacancy rate is topping out, so maybe this is implying that some of the empty office spaces is being converted in some way, whether to residential units, maybe retail spaces condition. This data is from our analysis of CoStar. I know different commercial brokerages have their own proprietary data. It shows different figures, but the trend line seems to be the same. Now, one other thing about the commercial real estate is there's not a consistent data. There's all this divergent different sets of data, so you have to look at it, but still trying to assess the market. And the office rent, it is positive. 1.4%, one can extract a little higher rent, but it is well below consumer price index and much below operating costs. So if you're owning an office building, it is tough. You're not collecting the rent, and then you have to pay the operating costs, the insurance costs, and other factors. Apartment buildings. So apartment absorption is still positive. So if you are doing leasing, yeah, there are people who want apartment leasing. It's just that there is so much production of new apartments, so the vacancy rates continue to increase, and if the vacancy rate continues to increase, trying to extract a little higher rent is hard to do. Today, there is a primary on DC mayor's election. DC, next mayor will be from the Democratic Party, which means that whoever wins today's primary will be the next mayor of Washington, D.C. In New York City, we know what happened. Mamdani won the election. One can say even comfortably. He was a declared socialist. It looks like in D.C., a declared socialist is probably going to win the primary today part. So what do you see from Mamdani? What could you see in Washington with the election of new mayor? Well, you're gonna see things like rent control, or there will be much more flexible on tenant rights protection. Essentially means people who don't pay rent, it's really hard to evict them condition. So one wonders what's gonna happen over time, because what this graph is showing is that if you want to have a little more affordable rents, how do you do it? You produce more apartment buildings. Rents are falling in Atlanta, rents are falling in Austin, rents are falling in Nashville. You produce a lot of apartments and the rents fall. So you don't have to even do a rent control because rents are actually declining condition. So the way you solve affordability issue is you build more housing and automatically the market will say, yes, you don't have to raise the rent strongly condition. So right now, apartment vacancy rate is still on the rise, and the apartment rent growth essentially close to zero. All this graph will be available to you, along with other links of which we have very detailed commercial real estate report, international report. Retail sector. So retail sector is essentially, some are vacating their space, and then some are coming into space. But it is no longer the bookstores or toy shops. It is the karate, if somebody wants to teach karate, or it could be the yoga studio. So things have changed, but right now there's no consistent positive movement on the retail spaces. But the vacancy rate on the retail is not alarming, even though you are not seeing new demand for retail spaces because the developers, they stayed away from building retail spaces, so there's lack of supply. So the lack of supply is keeping the vacancy rate very low on the retail spaces. And the rent growth, 2.3%, not great, but one can still extract because the vacancy rates are low. Now going into the industrial warehouses, and the demand is still positive, so there's still demand for warehouses. And Tim, as I was talking right before this meeting, you see this little peak that happened back in 2022 period. He had an interesting story in his local market. You want to share that with the audience about some industrial spaces? They're just saying, okay, here's an offering.
I was sharing with them, and I'm sure other people experience this in their markets as well. At one point, the industrial brokers in our market were putting properties on the market with no price tag whatsoever. They said, literally, just bring us offers, and we'll decide if we like any of them. So it was an auction process, basically, is what it was, because there was zero vacancy. So.
Because of zero vacancy, many developers start producing a lot of warehouses. And of course, with a lag time, over time, now we have a little surplus of industrial warehouse spaces nationwide. I mean, some market is still very tight condition depending on the job market, local job market part. But the absorption has really calmed down. Also at a time when there's a massive construction of warehouse spaces part. So therefore vacancy rate is no longer 0 or no longer 3.8%, but it has risen up to 7.5%. And the rents are much softer now than before. And coming to the end of my slide before we take a question and answer is, so one risk is that the economy does not appear to be on a recession, so that's not a risk. But the risk is this interest rate still remaining at 6.5% condition. People need to refinance, or people need to borrow money to buy commercial real estate buildings. And the interest rate makes it difficult in terms of all the calculation to make it work. So if the interest rate was to decline, it would help, but the risk was high oil prices. It makes inflationary pressure, interest rate higher, so that was the risk. With a peace deal, if somehow oil prices come down, maybe the interest rate could come down, or maybe not. But that's the part. But the other risk is the following. We have a massive federal government deficit. The overall spending is on the red. J.D. Vance, Vice President, is trying to identify how much of it is fraudulent spending, trying to reduce that red line somewhat. But the blue line is tax revenue. So you see the gap really opening up. So large budget deficit just means that government has issued a lot of government bonds to say, look, I need to borrow money. At a time when government is trying to borrow money, what's happening is that these tech titans, Amazon, Google, SpaceX, and others, they have plenty of money. But guess what? They want more money, so they're issuing bonds. So they're also issuing bonds to raise even more money. So whatever savings that Americans are doing is being soaked up by the federal government, and it's been soaked up by these tech titans, so there's less money available on the mortgage market condition. So the risk is with the federal deficit continuing to increase, it makes interest rate on the commercial real estate to go down very difficult. So you may want to consider today's interest rate as possibly the new normal condition, and don't expect somehow there will be a 1% drop in interest rate for commercial real estate, say 1 year from now. And this is the cumulative debt increase that has happened. And even with a large debt, interestingly, the dollar, if you want to look at only the past 6 months or so, you can say the dollar is weakening. But if you look at over a long-term horizon, dollar still remains quite strong condition, and it's because that ugly deficit debt chart that I showed you, well, if you look for Britain, you look at France, it is worse than America. So in a sense, our situation is not good, but other countries' situation is even worse. So what do? The alternative is the dollar condition. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to go into Q&A.